Today's episode is brought to you by Pan Macmillan, South Africa.
Pan Macmillan is part of the Macmillan Group, a Big Five publisher.
Gail, I already know which new release I am most excited about this month, but why don't you tell me yours?
Fiona, you're not going to believe it, but I am really excited to read Magic, the story of Desiree Ellis.
The local soccer star.
Yes, you know how obsessed I am with powerful women. She's been a Banyana player, captain, and head coach. And her story is truly inspiring. It's told to journalist Luke Alfred, who captures her journey from Salt River to the 2023 World Cup, and I believe it is written beautifully.
Sounds like it's not to be missed. Well, I am super excited about your domestic noir book, Gail. Little Secrets by Gail Schimmel is in all bookstores right now, and I found it unputdownable. The characters are so nuanced and interesting, and the situation they find themselves in had me at the edge of my seat.
I was on the edge of my seat writing it. I didn't always know where those characters were going to take me.
Especially Daisy, I'm sure.
Especially her.
Well, I love the way you ended this book. Your many fans will not be disappointed. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Hidden Lives of Writers. My name is Fiona Snickers, and I'm joined by Gail Schimmel. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Fiona. It's so exciting to be here doing our first episode.
How's your week been? I'm very aware that there's this whole world of school runs and schedules and children going on out there without me in it. You know, I'm an empty nester these days, and I'm just wondering, is it all carrying on without me? Is it as hectic as I remember?
It's carrying on without you and then some, I feel like. This year has started off at such a race, and I'm not on top of it, that is for sure. I'm kind of a little bit jealous of you and your empty nest at the moment, and I keep trying to remind myself that I'm going to look back in these days and wish that I was racing around between schools and sports events. But an empty nest is sounding pretty good to me.
Yeah, there's the odd moment of fond nostalgia, but mostly it's just sort of shuddering with horror and very happy that I'm not sitting in that traffic.
And the traffic at the moment with the load shedding, I cannot explain to you how it is shortening my life doing these school runs.
Okay, so the school run angle is hectic. But what has your writing week been like? Good, bad?
Fiona, it's an interesting one. I've got a whole lot of structural edits coming up. And because of that, I've just finished a book and I'm not starting something new at the moment. And I thought that I was going to be loving giving myself a break. And I am missing it so badly.
Okay.
What about you? How's your week been?
It's been pretty good. I'm trying something new these days. I've realized that my biggest enemy is social media in terms of concentrating and keeping my focus when I'm trying to write. So I'm trying this new thing of getting up really early in the morning before anyone else is awake, not looking at my phone, like not getting sucked into the news cycle, the update cycle, and just sitting down with some coffee and starting to write.
You don't even pick up your phone when you wake up, or do you allow yourself a quick look and then go to the coffee?
I switch off my alarm. I make sure that no child sitting in the Western Cape urgently wants my attention, but I don't open any emails. I don't open Facebook. I don't look at any notifications from my news sites. I go straight through, make the coffee and start writing and try and get a sort of solid 2 hours done before the day's even got going. And then I find I'm feeling really good about myself, super smug, and I can then handle the interruptions of the day.
I'm very impressed. You're going to have to keep me updated on this. And I'm a little bit, I feel a bit like an addict because I'm thinking, I don't know if I could not check Twitter first thing in the morning. Of course I've got to check first thing in the morning, but I'm really impressed. I look forward to hearing how that goes for you.
Yeah, Twitter, that's a bad one. It really is. It's such a time suck. It's such an attention suck. It's my biggest enemy at the moment. Just all the social media working together to take my attention away from writing.
100%. And I find often when I'm mid-write, I suddenly think I urgently need to check my phone, and I don't. So I think what you're doing, I think it might be the secret of writing.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I'll keep you updated. I even find these days that social media is getting in the way of whatever I'm watching or listening to or reading. You know, I'm reading a chapter, I'm going great guns, and suddenly I feel this terrible urge to check what's going on Instagram. Am I the only one?
100%. And I often, when I do it, when I suddenly, and as you say, you enter the chapter and then suddenly Instagram's urgent and we wonder why our children aren't reading.
Yeah.
You know, we grew up reading without the distraction, so we've already got the habit. But for these kids who've grown up with this quick satisfaction of social media and the dopamine hit of it, how are we expecting them to sit down and read a book from cover to cover without being distracted by social media when we can't even manage it? I think about it a lot.
Yeah, it's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. And as writers, I find we need to refill that creative well. And social media isn't really doing it. It's not giving you that kind of water of the gods that you need to keep writing.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever got an idea from a Facebook post or a tweet. Possibly I'm wrong. Possibly people can correct us on that, but I certainly have never got a story seed from social media. Other sources, yes, but social media, no.
Yeah, so we do need to focus on consuming that content, and that is something we're going to talk about. So just in terms of this week, what have you been watching, listening to, or reading that's caught your attention, either in a good or a bad way?
So I have an obsession at the moment with the power of older women and how exciting it is to be an older woman. And so I'm listening rather obsessively to a podcast called The Shift with Sam Baker. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the interviewees are writers. So for me, it ticks two boxes. It's the post-40 woman and the power of the post-40 woman and the experience of that woman, and also the writer, the experience of those writers. I'm obsessed with this podcast. It is giving me so much energy for my writing and for my living. And honestly, I recommend it to everybody.
Okay, well, that sounds great. I think I'm going to check it out. I think you tweeted about it.
Maybe just a few times.
So one can get some good ideas off Twitter now and then, maybe.
And what about you? What have you been consuming?
Well, a few days ago, I watched the sort of latest romantic comedy on Netflix, which is Your Place or Mine, featuring Reese Witherspoon and Ashton Kutcher. And it was fun. It just went down really well. I enjoyed it. And then a few days after that, I had that rom-com feeling, you know, I just wanted more. So I went onto Netflix and I started looking for the old romantic comedies, you know, from the 90s and the 2000s, and looking for one that maybe I missed. And I came across one called 2 Weeks Notice, with Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant. And I thought, well, those are the two classic romantic comedy.
Can't go wrong.
Can't go exactly. Wrong. What could possibly go wrong here? It was made in 2002, and it was so deep down in my soul disappointing. And I've been thinking about it ever since and trying to think, you know, what was wrong with it? Or is it something that's wrong with me? Because I strongly suspect that in 2002, which was not all that long ago, if I'd seen it when it came out, I would have quite enjoyed it.
Fiona, 2002 was 21 years ago.
Okay,
I think by anybody's
that's not true, is it?
Long ago.
Okay, that is maybe not just yesterday, but yeah. So I know I would have enjoyed it back then, and what has happened in between that I can no longer enjoy this thing. And it came down to a feeling that this movie would not be made anymore. It had too many themes that one would label problematic. And I like to think of myself as somebody who can look back at a product, a cultural product, and put it in its context and enjoy it for what it was. But this was, oh my gosh, it was so dumb. Hugh Grant he's a kind of millionaire businessman type, but he's not even an alpha male because he's under the thumb of his older brother who really runs the company. And all he does is sort of float around all day looking pretty and being silly. And he needs, one remembers her as his assistant because she's always tripping around after him with a notepad and helping him choose ties and telling him which shirt goes with which suit and so on. But actually, she's his legal advisor. She's a Harvard-educated legal advisor. That's Sandra Bullock. And, of course, they spend so much time together that they end up falling in love. But at the end of it, I was asking myself, why? He's not redeemed in any way. All he does is he's about to break a promise that he's made to her, and at the end he ends up keeping the promise. And somehow the bar is so low that she's like, okay, let's get married straight away.
Well, in defense of the story, it is Hugh Grant.
He's
20 years ago.
He's pretty. I looked at him. I enjoyed looking at him. He was lovely to look at, but he's a complete bimbo. I don't know where this man's self-respect was, even to say yes to this project, but it probably made him a lot of money. So, what is it? Has our kind of wokeness of 2023 spoiled cultural products for us?
That's a big question. And that's a question I want us to be asking our guests a great deal.
We've got a very exciting guest today. Her name is Angela Makholwa, and she is the author of several published works, including Red Ink, 30th Candle, The Black Widow Society, The Blessed Girl, and most recently Critical But Stable. And it was recently announced that she has a new book coming out this year, which is the sequel to Red Ink. We're hoping to ask her more about that. So we are very excited to have Angela Makholwa in the studio with us today. Hi, Angela, and welcome. What has your writing week been like?
Phew, Fiona, I'm glad you're asking this week because I'd had about 5 months of just dead air. I'd started this manuscript, I think around early to mid last year. It was growing great. And then I had a research trip scheduled to Swaziland because a lot of what happens in the book is set in Swaziland. Mm-hmm. And I had a family emergency, a family crisis that just put the brakes on everything.
Right.
And shifted my focus completely, because it involved one of my family members' health. And of course, that kind of thing just completely throws you. Mm. So I had to cancel the trip, then got out of my writing mode completely. And even to the point that I feared that I wouldn't regain it. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to remember what the catalyst actually for me to get back on the horse was a meeting with the publishers, which will get you back on the horse, especially if you spent the advance that they gave you months ago.
And we've always spent the advance that they gave us.
Yeah, so that's, but I'm glad because, it's a book that so a couple of things are interesting about this manuscript is that one, it's a sequel, to my debut novel, Red Ink, which was a crime thriller, as you may know. And I had sworn that I would never, ever write a sequel. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the reasons also why it's so challenging, because I just thought, how do you reprise a character that you left, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Mm-hmm. And fortunately for me, Red Ink did have kind of this open-ended ending, and readers have been asking me for a sequel for the longest time. And I'd always said, I don't think this is going to happen. But I think a couple of things also kind of spurred that on. I'm currently working on the screenplay for Red Ink with television writers because it's been commissioned for television.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think that also helps, because we're reprising all the characters all the time, every day, because also television writing has an intensity that I don't find in novel writing, because novel writing is such a solitary exercise. Whereas television is group work, it's collaboration. And so it's interesting to also have all of these people, all of these minds kind of trying to write plot and characterization And I think it's just a great way to kind of reject that muscle for me, that creative muscle. And I guess it just makes it easier because I'm talking about these characters all the time. So now it's easy for them to come back on the page. So it's been a very interesting time.
So how does that work? Are you sitting in the writer's room for Red Ink, or do they produce content and then run it past you?
I'm sitting in the writer's room because I did something different with Red Ink that I hadn't done with my other novels. So they'd all been commissioned or the rights had been sold to different producers. But then I was getting frustrated because they would expire. People would buy the rights or they would hold the rights and then they'd expire. Nothing happens. And so I just decided I'm going to do this one myself. So I've got the rights to Red Ink. I got them back from the publishers and then I put together the treatment, sourced money to get a TV writer on board to help me with the treatment, pitched it to a streaming service. They liked it. They bought it. And so in other words, I'm both a producer and a co-writer on the series with other writers.
That is incredibly exciting and very inspiring.
Yeah.
You've made me have so many questions about it that I need to get my head together.
Let's have some coffee.
I want to take a step back and I want to ask you to take us back to how you became a writer in the first place. And I know that, like me, you've got quite a hectic day job. So how did the day job happen and how did the writing become part of that?
Look, the writing, we were talking about how people find their path, alien life. You were talking about your son. And I think with me, it struck me at around 14 or 15 years old that like, I want to write. I want to be a writer. I want to be a novelist. And it seemed far-fetched at the time because I was a black child living in a township. I didn't know anyone who was a writer. I didn't even know that that's a job. But of course, I read a lot of books. So I figured, obviously there's people doing this. And so the closest thing that I could do that resembled what I wanted to do from the very beginning was journalism. So then I studied journalism and I worked as a journalist for not for a very long time, to be honest, for about 2 years, because I've also had a very strong entrepreneurial edge in me. Like this entrepreneurial fire has always been burning in my belly. So I knew that also I'd probably segue into that at some point. So anyway, as a journalist, I came across, I used to like reporting on crime. And I'd been following Moses Sithole's story, who was a serial killer at the time, was terrorizing young black women, again in the township. So people like me. And so, I just had this thing that I needed to get to the bottom of why this person was doing this. And so when he was finally incarcerated and then sentenced, I wrote to him and then I wanted to go to visit him at CMAX, at Pretoria Maximum Security Prison, to find out why, because I didn't understand that level of evil, like in a person. I didn't understand how a person could be that way. And for some reason I wanted to find out for myself. And so I wrote to Moses Sithole, and then he didn't respond to my letter for years. Fortunately, I'd kept the same mobile number, and just out of the blue, I left journalism. I started my PR practice, and out of the blue, I get a call from this person who claims to be Moses Sithole and who says I wrote a letter to him, which I couldn't remember by this time because I think it was a good 6 or 7 years later.
Goodness.
And obviously I left the field of reporting. And so I thought, but I would still freelance because I've always loved writing. So then I labored over it and I decided, no, let me go see this person because I'm still interested in the story. So I went to see him and he lied and said to me that I had written to him wanting to write his life story and that my appeal sounded so genuine and that he thought I got it. I was willing to not judge him and write his story,
justifying being a serial killer.
Yeah, well, that's me, right? So anyway, so I thought about that as well, and I decided to write the book. But obviously, I had my own agenda, and clearly, obviously, I didn't want to justify why he did what he did, but I did want to find out why he did what he did. Yeah. And so that's how I wrote. So initially Red Ink was supposed to be a biography on a serial killer. Mm-hmm. But being the psychopath that he is, he started calling me a lot, writing me love letters, and also just the telling of his narrative. It was clear that this person is not going to really reveal who he is. And so I dropped that project because it wasn't going anywhere. But then I met a publisher to whom I shared this whole story, and he thought, that is brilliant. So you've got all this material, you're not going to do anything with it. I'm like, there's nothing I can do about it. I've got his case files, I've got everything, but he's a liar, And he said to me, well, why don't you fictionalize it? So that's what I did.
Stunning.
And then your next book was a pretty dramatic change of genre, wasn't it? That was 30th Candle, which one could call women's fiction. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was kind of marketed as chick lit, mm-hmm. which maybe is a term that isn't much in use anymore.
Exactly so.
Was it a genre you were reading and consuming at the time?
Actually, yes. Of course, I was in my late 20s. Mm-hmm. Yes, you actually asked me about a rom-com and I said no. But I actually remember I did read a lot of it and watch those movies that we all watched. Because I guess that's the space I was in. I was young, looking for love. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing was that, the darkness of Red Ink, because I had to imagine the worst that could have happened in those encounters with Moses when I wrote the book. So I went to a very dark and frightening place. And I think I just needed something much lighter, something much more grounded in like a young woman's, reality and just lighter. So that's why it was easier. It was just the most opportune time for me to write, that kind of literature. And I enjoyed the experience. And I found that a lot of young women, found themselves, they could identify with a lot of the characters. So that resonance also and that connection with your readership, I think it shifts something in you, because I think at that time I still hadn't figured out if this is a full-time thing or a flash in the pan kind of thing. But having that connectedness and talking to people and seeing that your stories shift something in people or move something in people, it just kind of spurs you on. I don't know if you guys have experienced the same thing, if you feel the same way, but yeah, it really does something.
There's something about turning 30, isn't there? It's quite a big birthday. I mean, we talk about 40 and 50 and 60, but there's something about that 30, that big birthday that really makes, especially young women, I think, reevaluate their lives. Gail, when you were 30, were you sort of totally content with the path your life was on?
So it's so interesting that you've highlighted this, because the first book I wrote, which is not the first book of mine that was published, but the first book I wrote, the file name was 30-Maddie. Maddie was the main character.
Yeah.
And 30 was my aim, that I wanted to have written a book by the time I was 30. Because that to me was some sort of cutoff. If you haven't done it by 30, are you going to do it? Now, of course, I know that is absolute rubbish. You've got your whole life ahead of you at 30. But it's really, it's an interesting.
It's societal. It's both internal and an external kind of pressure. Because I remember that I was going through that as well. It just felt like, okay, now I'm no longer in my 20s, so I can't get away with, kind of being like a mini adult. It just felt like this is the cornerstone of what the arrival of adulthood looks like. So I think that's why we put so much pressure. But the strange thing is, I don't think men feel the same way towards that milestone. I didn't interact with a lot of men who felt like, 30 is, like if I don't make it by 30, that's it. So it's a very female thing. And I don't know why we do that to ourselves.
And I especially don't know why, when we just have so much power as older women, but I'm now veering into my new obsession of the power of older women. Fiona, how old were you when your first book was published?
I think I was 38. So I didn't make that 30 cutoff by a long shot.
Finish line.
And it hasn't affected me, but there was this idea, I remember at the time, that you had to be married by 30.
Yes, at that
you
time
had to have your
especially.
first child
True.
by 30.
True.
You had to
I
be
remember.
well launched on your career by 30.
That's it.
You had to have your life together, your style, your everything. You had to know who you were and what path you
And
were
I think
on.
those women's magazines that we were filling our brains with also had a big part to play with.
Emptying our brains with, some would say.
Yes, yes.
And our mothers' lives, maybe, because I think they came from a generation where who you were when you were 30 did define who you were going to be for the rest of your life. Whereas for us, it's the ability to reinvent ourselves is endless. You're now a screenwriter. And you just a few days over 30. So, you know.
Thank you for that. Let's keep it that way. Don't edit that one out.
Angela, can I ask you about your writing day? How many words? Where do you write? When do you write? What targets do you set yourself? Let us see into your writing world.
That is the worst thing in the world. So I remember I did this writing course where we were given kind of an idea of what the prescribed number of words need to be in a manuscript, and it was 85,000. And as I said, that this current manuscript has been one of the most challenging for me. And so now that I have started again working on it, this week being my first big writing week, how opportune to have this podcast now. So I've been telling myself, okay, at least, so I kept on looking at the word count, which is the worst thing you can do to yourself. And I never used to do that. So I keep looking at the word count and I write my guts out. And then it's like, I've only done like 2,000 words. Like, no, how am I going to get to,
Okay, I'm interrupting.
Yes.
Only done 2,000 words.
Well, no, this is not over a day, Gail.
Okay.
And before we get excited, no. And I'm thinking, no, let me not look at the word count. Let me look at the pages. So I'm like, I remember I was speaking to my friend, I think, day before yesterday, because, I was just in a good writing space. And I said to her, I'm going to go find a quiet place in a hotel. And she says, you've got expensive problems. I said to her, at home, I can't write. In the office, it's the office. People come and they ask me about, whatever, clients and this and that and the other. So I found a hotel, near my house. I went to sit in the hotel lobby, had my coffee, and then, started and put on my headphones, played some mood music to shut off everything around me, and I started writing. And I said to my friend, I'm going to put in 25 pages today.
That's a lot.
I don't know what that is in words, and I'm obsessed with word counts. So
yeah, so I said 25 pages.
I think you're doing great. I'm going to go home and figure out how many pages that is in words. But that growing a manuscript, you feel that is a huge pressure. Is that how you measure whether you've had a good day writing, if the manuscript's grown? Or do you go, I only wrote a page, but my God, it was a good page?
That's what I was doing initially, like in the beginning of of this manuscript. And I was judging myself a lot. I was editing. I was belaboring, like each and every page and word had to be perfect. So then I decided to change my strategy, and I thought, you know what, let's just get it in there. And then, of course, editing is every writer's best friend. So I could go back and I could clean up. So that's the approach that I'm trying to take now, that let me put down the thoughts, because then when I overthink and I want to perfect it, then I get stuck in this zone called writer's block, which is a zone I do not like to be in. So I'm trying this approach. And also, I think another thing that I picked up from the TV people, the TV writers, is that they plan and plot a lot. There's a lot of meetings where you're just planning an episode, and so I'm trying to do that more, which I wasn't doing. I was like a freehand kind of writer, that would clean up after. So I'm taking time to sit down and plot it out and, do my character development and do more detailed character bios than I used to, which is quite helpful. So once you do that, I find that even the freestyling of your writing you do it with more confidence because you've got a clearer idea of where this whole thing is going.
Right. So working on the script is bleeding over into working on a novel, and you kind of adopting some of the techniques of screenwriting to give you energy for going through your novel.
That's exactly it. And it's been incredible. And there's also just this interesting writing technique that they have in screenwriting. It's called Save the Cat. It's about a 15-step process that literally maps out your hero's journey. Mm-hmm. And I'm also finding that incredibly helpful, in writing this book. So,
is that something we can Google? And
yes, please Google it. You will love it. Your life will change forever. Your writing life, that is.
Okay, Angela, you can go home now. You've given us what we need.
Goodwill to the writing nation.
Yeah, I've heard of that. There are writers really who take Save the Cat and use that as their blueprint.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I just haven't gone into it myself, but yeah.
No, you must.
Very interesting.
Yeah, just Google it and then you will, you love it. Especially I think for the crime genre, because of the fact that you have to work so hard in hooking the reader. Mm. You know, your cliffhangers, your red herrings and all of that kind of stuff. Like, if you structure it within the Save the Cat structure, I find that it just becomes much stronger. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You've talked about how you're plotting it out more. Before this, were you a pantser or were you a plotter? Do you write just off the seat of your pants, or do you plot out?
I plotted it out in my head, especially when I'm driving. It's so strange, the places that just kick in that creative muscle. So when I'm driving, I think about it, and I even talk to myself. I talk to myself, and then I have these conversations between the characters, and this is what's going to happen. And then when I do that, immediately when I get home, after checking out the kids and I normally cannot pull myself from that laptop because I want to capture it all down. Mm. So that's how it's been happening throughout the years, which is, I don't know how I survived on that, but I did. Because now that I've found this other technique, I find I'm thrilled at how much easier it is.
So interesting.
So your third novel in 2013 was The Black Widow Society. Mm. And I think when we first met, it was at a Jenny Cruis Williams event where you were talking about, I think, 30th Candle. Mm-hmm. So you were there to sort of push 30th Candle. I was there to push probably one of my Trinity books. And we had them for sale. And you also started talking about this new manuscript that you had an idea for, about women, fairly high society women who got together with the view to murdering their own husbands.
I loved that book.
And everybody was in it until each husband was gone. You couldn't your husband's gone and now you can opt out of it.
Yeah.
And I remember we were all so gripped by that idea. And when Jenny opened questions to the audience, everyone was like, okay, but where's that manuscript? Can I buy it? Is it here? Where is it? I want it, and then come 2013, some years later, it did appear and I believe did extremely well and was a very gripping manuscript. And that was a return to the crime genre for you, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think it's interesting being a novelist in South Africa, because you get boxed in less than when you're an international writer. Mm. I feel like now, Gail, you will know this with, when you're exposed to, international markets, there's just a much more pressing need for you to kind of identify yourself as a specific genre writer.
Yes.
Define yourself.
Yeah. And in South Africa, I've found that even with my publishers, we never had that long discussion like, no, but, aren't you supposed to be a crime writer? We want more crime from you, or we want more, women's fiction from you. So, firstly, just that gratitude to be able to, switch hats as and when you feel like it.
Yes.
And I read more crime fiction. I think I'm more of a crime buff than I am anything else, when it comes to genre writing. Although strangely these days I'm reading more, non-fiction. Mm-hmm. And I think also when I'm writing crime, I try not to read too much crime because I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to feel like an idea, because you have a lot of ideas that feel original in your head, But then once you watch an American crime movie or series, you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's my idea. They're going to think I stole this from Dharma. So I try to separate myself from the genre that I'm writing so that I can just feel that freshness and originality in my ideas.
I find a great comfort in knowing that actually there are no original ideas.
Yeah.
It gives me great comfort.
Yeah.
It gives me, and because I'm doing some intense genre writing in my Katie Gail partnership with Kate Sidley, where you write to a particular genre, and Fiona, you know this feeling, and Fiona, I have to say, is queen of the swapping genres and being able to do it completely capably. But then you find you aren't expected to have original ideas, and there's something quite freeing about that.
You're expected to stick to the tropes. You're expected to hit all the story beats and produce something that's original, but also predictable and familiar and comfortable for your reader.
And it feels it's a move away from that trying to be original.
Is it an issue of, if you say to me that I'm going to be reading a crime thriller, as a reader, you must fulfill the expectation of what comes with that. Right? I guess that's part of it. And that's why there's kind of a subtle formulaicness in certain genres, right?
Completely. I think it's part of your promise to the reader. But it is an interesting one because we also all want to be original.
Don't we just? Don't we just?
So speaking of original, and this was a very original manuscript, in 2017 you came out with The Blessed Girl. That's how you say it, right? Blessed.
Yes, The Blessed Girl. People always ask me, is it The Blessed Girl or The Blessed Girl? But it's The Blessed Girl.
Yes, I've heard you saying The Blessed Girl, which did very well in South Africa and also sold into the UK market. I know Gail's got a question about that. What was your inspiration for that? Because I know you've never been a blessed girl.
Oh, sadly, no.
Do you know that, Fiona? Do you know that?
I will die with that secret. So the inspiration was social commentary. It was just a phenomenon that was a bit strange to me because, we've always had the sugar baby and sugar daddy kind of phenomenon in society with older men, younger women. But the strange thing to me, and I think social media had a lot to do with it, is that it was almost becoming kind of a subculture, especially amongst like young black girls. And I just, what was curious to me was that initially, it was the kind of thing that you could view as a poverty trap problem. Like, in other words, these girls see these men as a way to, escape their circumstances of lack. But what was interesting and intriguing to me was that a lot of the girls who, labeled themselves, and they happily did, label themselves as blessees at the time. That was the term. Now it's slay queen or sugar babies and so on. Was that these girls were educated. Some of them came from middle class homes, and so my biggest question about that was like, why? Why would you want? So I didn't understand it. And like the Moses story, when I don't understand something, I want to go out there and find out why. Like, especially if it's something that's very disconnected to my own values and my own way of viewing the world, and not necessarily approaching it with a lens of judgment, but a lens of like the journalist in me, I suppose, like just wanting to know and understand. And so I interacted with a lot of these young girls and these young women. And I tried to also speak to the blessers. Of course, they were completely shut off. But I did gain a lot of insights around why a lot of these ladies do that. So then, and those insights became a lot of the anecdotal stuff actually made it into my manuscript.
Yeah, your character Bontle, she's not an object of pity in the book, is she? She's got agency. She's in charge of her own destiny. These are self-conscious choices that she's making. Did you create her as a character like that deliberately?
Yes. She's kind of an anti-hero, and the reason she's like that is because she embodies a lot of like what I found in my, like in the people that I interviewed. I hate the word subjects. In the people that I interviewed, because I needed to show that this is not like a path, like this is not a way, it's not a plea for help. For a lot of these women, it's an empowered statement to say, well, if you're going to waste 100,000 rand on me, I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it, and you're going to have to deal with the consequences. If I leave you for somebody else, that's not my business. I'm not the married one. You are. I'm not the owner one. You are. So you're going to have to deal with it. But for me, this is access to a lifestyle that I, aspire to, that I feel I deserve. And so I'll do what it takes to live it. And then you as the man are going to have to deal with the consequences of that. If it destroys your marriage, it destroys your marriage, not my marriage, kind of thing. So.
And when I read Blessed Girl, I thought this was a South African phenomena, and I've since learned that it's actually an international phenomenon. The young women all over the world seeing in these transactional relationships
with older men,
and also strangely that don't always involve sex.
Yes, sometimes it's not about sex, but it is about, also the other very strange aspect of it that I cannot wrap my head around is that, because of social media, of the influence of social media, sometimes it's just about a guy who feels that the ultimate ticket to being seen as having made it or as having arrived is having one of these women, in his arm, like being spotted somewhere or being seen on social media with so-and-so, who is supposed to be like the most expensive woman, the most, she's a prize. And so
status symbol.
It's a status symbol. And it's such a strange thing. And they're willing to spend a lot of money, whatever that woman wants, they're willing to spend it as long as, they can have that association.
And have people know that that's what it's about.
That's who they, yeah.
It's so interesting. My question about Blessed Girl is a very righty one. You had to change the ending for the international audience. Now, without giving any spoilers, can you talk to us about what that was like?
It's very strange. It was strange, but I think it was a little bit expected because, first of all my books, I didn't expect The Blessed Girl to be the one that, cracks the international market. I thought it was a very South African story. And I was happy to write it for my South African audience. And so when, Bloomsbury approached my agent or when Bloomsbury asked my agent for the rights, the international rights, it was a huge surprise. But then I thought, if I read, obviously a lot of us are exposed to European literature, American literature. I just had an inkling that a lot of the things that happened with Bontle, especially towards the end, would probably just not resonate with that audience, because I did like the fact that they saw it as an empowerment, even though in a twisted way, an empowerment story for a young woman in terms of identity, like that she had that agency. She wasn't a victim, but at the same time, they had but I think that is the thing that resonated the most. So, which is why they were not happy with my South African ending, because my South African ending is kind of more on the cautionary tale type of trail, which I know also even some of my South African readers were not happy with, and some were, but anyway, it is what it is. So with the international, the overseas market, it was an issue of, not can we romanticize how you have fate, but a more, can we have a gentler ending, to it, to her adventures and whatnot. And so we went back and forth about it a lot because I said to them, I don't think that, she's going to sail off into the sunset with Prince Charming, because for me, that just doesn't ring true. So I can't write that kind of ending because it doesn't ring true for the character, for me, the way that I perceive this character and the way that I understand this character. And then we had to have a middle ground, which is ultimately what happened.
And which is your favorite, the South African ending or the international ending? For someone who hasn't read the book, which one would you prefer for them to read?
I think I have days. When I like the UK version the most. And I think where that comes from is especially when I think about Bontle or I talk about her, because people talk about her as if it's somebody that they know personally. And it just feels like, no, this is probably how things would have ended for her. But for me, what was important about the South African ending was that, I just felt like there was a danger of glamorizing this kind of lifestyle. And I felt like there's real consequences in the real world that come with this lifestyle. And I wanted it to be like a punch in the face. Like it's all good and well, to live like this, but sometimes, most of the time, it just doesn't end well.
Maybe we want our daughters to be reading the South African version, but we can read the international.
I think, once the daughters turn 30, they can go overseas and read the international version because they'll be mature enough to take it. I'm joking.
Speaking of joking, Blessed Girl was a novel where you really started flexing your comic ability.
Oh, what fun.
And it was, in fact, shortlisted for the Comedy Women in Print Award in the UK.
Yes, yeah.
And I believe came very close to winning. And Marion Keyes loved it and said that she loved it publicly. Was that fun for you? Because in your next manuscript, I feel like you carried on that kind of comic tone.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, strangely enough, when I wrote Red Ink, I did try to sneak in some bursts of humor, some comic relief, but people missed it. I think people were so focused on the grittiness of what was happening there that they completely lost it. And I was disappointed because I kept on, I remember when I was doing the interview, the tours and all of that kind of stuff, I expected somebody to say, oh, but I did love, that there were this burst of humor in all this crime, and everybody missed it. So clearly my comic muscle was not as strong as I thought it was at the time. But I think that is a South African trait. And I think that we deal with even the harshest, circumstances and the harshest, trails in life with humor. And it was important for me, or I think it's just part of the way that I also, go through life. So it was important for me to have that come across in my writing. I remember writing The Blessed Girl, I would be cackling on my own at 2 a.m. in the morning, not believing the things that come out of this character's mouth. I would like to, it's obviously not as easy when you're writing like hardcore crime, like I'm writing at the moment, to have, those opportunities for the lighter, like for the slice of life moments. But I really did enjoy the humor. I did enjoy writing, humor.
Okay. And then in 2020, we got Critical But Stable for you, where the sort of comic thread continued. And it's a book dealing with 3 families who belong to the same social club, and who are very much keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with the Kumalos, as I think you've said, competing with each other, in terms of their wealth and status symbols and brand names. And behind those glitzy exteriors, there are marriages and relationships that aren't going all that well. So what was your inspiration for that novel? And in terms of social commentary, what were you trying to achieve with that?
Again, I feel that Critical But Stable is a very South African story, based in very South African phenomenon. Black South Africans have shifted, more Black South Africans have shifted into the middle class and the upper middle class. And it's interesting for me how class is becoming a big kind of issue now. The politics of class are becoming almost bigger than the politics of race, although race will always be an issue in South Africa. So I wanted to explore that, and I wanted to explore what it means to be extremely wealthy and Black in this current environment, in this current South Africa. Because I think people view that, because obviously it's still a much smaller, percentage of our population. So people tend to either over glamorize it or view it as, oh, these people, it must be ill-gotten gains, which is also a thing that I wanted
very
to
common narrative.
debunk. Yeah,
yes.
it's a narrative I wanted to debunk. And then also that, again, people tend to over-glamorize it or vilify it. So I wanted to actually go into those homes, go into these people's lifestyles and go through their trials, their tribulations, whether they seem superficial, to somebody who's outside looking in. But the thing is, they are couples. They are like any other couple. They have usually the same issues that a couple in Kliptown, in Alex, like in terms of how the men, or rather the dynamic between the two married people, whether it's a man and a man or a man and a woman, that those issues, relationship issues, are common throughout different social strata. And I wanted to reflect on that and show the pettiness of how we can be as human beings, whether you've got $1 million in your account or you've got 5 rands in your account. But also it was about with regards to, so for instance, one of the couples have a domestic worker who sometimes sneaks in her daughter because of xenophobic violence in the township where they live. So it was also to bring in the marrying of those two worlds, which is also a South African reality, that it's hard to separate a Sandton from an Alex because they live chick by jowl with each other. And that is the same even in that micro environment of a home, that the people in big house may have lots of money, but right next to them in the maid's quarters is somebody who's going through the things that that ordinary South Africans go through, that they're not very far removed from that. And so the people that have made it cannot remove themselves from those realities either.
It's so interesting, this explanation, because when we were preparing for today, I went back to see what I had said about Critical But Stable when I read it initially, and I called you the Jilly Cooper of the northern suburbs of Johannesburg. And listening to you talk about it, I actually think I was particularly on point, because Jilly Cooper explores class and the reality of the stories behind people who appear to outsiders to be upper class, etc. But she does it in England. So I would say to any listener who loved Jilly Cooper, go and read Critical But Stable, because really it there's a similarity in the aims and in your explanation, and I'm so relieved that I made a comment that was so on point.
Nailed it.
Another trend that I've noticed in your writing is that by this point you were starting to write more openly about sex. And haven't
I always?
I think Critical But Stable broke new ground here.
Me too.
And just as with Red Ink, you were one of the first, if not the first, black writer of the crime genre in South Africa. And I think that writing openly about sex is also a thing that you're breaking new ground with. Do you feel that it's when it comes to black characters and black writers, was it ever a taboo? Is it still a taboo? Are you consciously breaking a taboo here?
Sure. Yeah, no. If you see how I often have to edit and sometimes even think of deleting some of my sex scenes, especially I remember with The Blessed Girl, there's an incident where, Bontle goes to see a surgeon, after a sexual encounter with a very well endowed, I don't know if I'm allowed to say any of this, very well endowed,
please say whatever you like.
Lover. And she thinks, that something has happened in her nether regions that must be fixed because that cannot be normal. And I remember I wrote this scene and I think I had wine. It was late, 3 a.m. It sounded perfectly perfect. Until I had to read it the next morning and think of my mother reading it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I hope, and I then, in the end, you leave these scenes because you laugh and you're thinking, okay, it's either they're going to hate it, they will be scandalized, or they're going to laugh about it. So then you, of course, leave it to the editor at the publishers to make the call. And I thought, you know what? If they say, no, this is a bit too much, you can take it. I'll live. I'll see. I think I'll live because I don't know how I'm going to read this except like at a book festival. And I actually did read I normally avoid it. So I went to Swaziland on a writer's tour, and Swaziland is a fairly conservative society. And I remember there was a majority male audience at this reading.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember I was tired, I was irritable, a lot of things had gone wrong with the organization of the thing. And I was asked to read from The Blessed Girl. And for some reason, I went for that except, and you should have seen the look on the audience's faces. They were not impressed. They were not impressed at all.
Oh, really? I bet you sold hundreds of books from reading it.
They hated it but loved it. So stop it, I like it kind of situation.
They went back for more.
They went back for more after looking like they were so embarrassed by what came out of this woman's mouth. So, yeah.
And time. Your mother? How did your mother react?
My mother loves it. My mother loves my books. My gosh, she's my first reader. She loves it. And she's never commented on the sex. I guess she leaves it to gossip with her friends. Say, sure, I can't believe I raised that monster.
That sex maniac.
I love that. Yeah.
Angela, you raised such an interesting point about whether we as writers must self-censor at the point of writing, or whether we must leave it to the editor to do the sort of cleaning up for us. Do you ever feel the urge while you're writing, like, oh, no, I can't say that. Oh, I'll get in trouble if I say that. Oh, the climate's not right for me to be putting this on paper. And do you kind of edit yourself in advance, or do you just put it all on the page and leave it to your publishers and editors to sort out?
I think I do enjoy pushing boundaries in the themes that I explore, especially in a country like South Africa, which just kind of does need to be nudged every now and then. So I remember with the xenophobia like sub theme in Critical But Stable. I mean, that's a big issue here in South Africa. And I just felt like that. I just felt like there's a lot of issues that we don't explore, especially as the middle class, especially the black middle class, with regards to that the xenophobia that is more inflamed, especially in less privileged areas, because there is that sense amongst a lot of underprivileged people that, opportunities are being stripped from them, and it's, they feel ignored. They feel that the government is not listening to their plight. But as the middle class, of course, we have a liberal attitude, let me call it that, towards that, because it's a lot about, this is oppression, this is Afrophobia. But I think there is a need to explore it holistically and not just brush it off as, this is a self-hatred of us as Africans hating other Africans. I think there's a more layered and a more nuanced discussion within this issue than what we are willing to explore.
Yeah, middle class people are very
issue.
Sort of sheltered from the problem of xenophobia.
Yes.
Whereas if you sort of living on the ground, maybe in a township, you have a completely different view of it.
It's a completely different view of it. So I wanted to explore both sides of that coin, and it was a difficult thing because I thought, I might get into trouble with this. But I thought it was important, to air that out.
And you, Gail, are you sort of censoring yourself before you get onto the page, or overthinking things, second guessing yourself?
Definitely more than I used to. I definitely think something has happened. I don't know if it's because of social media making conversation so immediate and so extreme. I don't know if it's because we are all more woke than we were. I don't know if it's because people get demonized very easily. But I definitely am checking myself more. And very, very aware as I write about South Africa that I'm a white middle class woman and my reality is not everybody's reality. And sometimes you've got to say to yourself, just leave that behind, just write the story, let the voice be heard. And afterwards, maybe if I've gone too far, I can check myself then. And you?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, when I started out writing, I had no fear. I happily created a first-person character, a young black woman living in South Africa. I inhabited her world, told her story over 4 books, and I remember talking about it at panels and festivals and so on, and being quite happy to defend my choice and feeling confident in that choice. And these days, I don't think I would do it again. I've kind of come to the conclusion that I'm not the best person to be telling that story and that I should maybe just leave that alone for now and tell different stories that I'm maybe more, in inverted commas, qualified to tell. Not saying that I'm only going to populate my narratives with people who look and sound exactly like me, but maybe not do a sort of first person perspective of a life that I have never lived and will never truly be able to understand. It's, yeah.
I definitely, I think if you wrote Trinity now, you would be demonized. So,
probably.
It's so interesting how times change.
It is interesting. And
I mean, I found that also with the UK, like my current books that I'm writing for the UK market, I find that there's much more censoring, that there's something called a cultural editor.
A sort of sensitivity editor.
A sensitivity editor. And I didn't realize, so it's Critical But Stable that has gone through this process, and the 30th Candle. And I remember thinking, like, when I first encountered this term of a sensitivity editor, it was when I was editing Critical But Stable for the US and UK market. And I thought, okay, so if there's so many issues, like there were issues about how I represent homosexual characters. So I talk about asexuality in Critical But Stable. There was also an issue about how I represent that. And it's things that, of course, as a writer, as somebody who has lived like in a woke environment, you think you have tackled with sensitivity. And of course, the barometer for sensitivity is very subjective. Like I could think that I've covered my bases. But like you say, you go in there with the best of intentions because you're thinking, I was even thinking, I've always thought representation matters. I've almost had homosexual characters in almost all my books because of that. And it was kind of it wasn't even an overly intentional thing. It was just kind of like, of course, we all are different and we live amongst different people. So we need to see all these people on the page, or as many people in their various hues and colors and whatever as possible on the page that represent what the world really looks like. So I don't think you do that. You go in there when you're thinking about representation. You go in there intending to be an asshole. You go in there intending to be representative. But of course, somebody somewhere will very likely be offended.
Yeah.
I also think that in South Africa, we talk about it. In South Africa, we're not scared to talk about the elephant in the room. Yeah. We're not scared to tackle the xenophobia. We're not scared to tackle the homophobia, and we don't skirt around it. And I had one I think you and I have spoken about it, a very bad experience with someone.
Calling you. Yes. What in the world is this?
I had a very bad experience with someone trying to edit out the race of one of my characters. And it made me furious, but it also, and I won that battle and I think might have lost an editor their job. But I do think in South Africa we're less afraid of saying it. And that the sensitivity editors in other countries are so sensitive and so scared that they don't even want to talk about the thing that we want to bring out there. I think there's a big difference.
There was an interesting development among South African writers a few years ago, particularly among Black South African writers, where there was a kind of split between those writers who were prepared to engage in traditionally white spaces like book festivals and certain panels that were run and owned by white people. And then there were those who said, no, we're not engaging in those spaces anymore. We're going to create our own venues for discussion. And I know you have friends in both camps, and you yourself have continued to sort of engage in those white spaces. Is it something that you wrestled with? Was it a difficult decision?
It was a difficult decision, because where that sentiment came from is something that obviously as a Black person, I completely had experienced and felt, so let me just put it into context. So coming into the literary scene, I think it was around 2007.
Yes.
And I don't know if I had any expectations. I didn't know what this world looks like. I just thought you write a book, then maybe you conduct a few interviews to promote it, and then you go back to your life. I didn't know that there's festivals, literary festivals to be attended, talks to be given, panel discussions to be had,
podcasts,
podcasts to be done. And so my first experience of a literary festival was actually quite a pleasant one and very representative, because it was the time of the writer in Durban. And,
that's always been different.
Yes, it's always been different. So I thought that's the texture and feel of how these things go. And I thought, oh, great. This is scary, daunting, but wonderful. And so then of course I started then I went to a German festival, literary festival. And of course, it's Germany. I can't expect, I think I was like the only Black person in the room, but it's Germany. What am I expecting? And it was a small town in Germany even at the time. Then I came back to South Africa, started doing the literary circuits in Cape Town. And that's where the culture shock came in straight, because I think it was the issue of how even audience members received you. It wasn't just about, just the fact that you're probably like one of two Black people in the room. It was the kind of questions that are posed at you, the kind of comments that are made, which were a lot of the time tone deaf and condescending. And so you felt, I don't know, I would come out of those places feeling lost, feeling just kind of discombobulated. I didn't understand whether, what I'm trying to say in my writing was understood, but also I didn't feel that I am seen the way that the white writers are seen. Like it's almost like, oh, you amazing little Black girl, you managed to put 60,000 words together into a page, like into a book, So it was that sense of disconnection, I think, that brought that whole kind of revolution of Black writers just not wanting to be in spaces where they did not feel seen and did not feel understood. But I think the logical person, I'm a businesswoman, the logical person in me understood that I'm writing for different audiences. This is South Africa, and I need to talk about my books. I need to open new avenues for my work so that my work is read. And also I didn't feel that it was very helpful if we are feeling like white audiences don't understand this world that we're writing about for us to completely alienate them. Because I think part of the South African experiment is cutting down those barriers of like understanding, those cultural barriers. And how you do that, of course, is that, Fiona should be able to read my book as much as I'm a Black female writer, as she would read Gail's book, and and be able to have a conversation about it and explore everything that I'm talking about without the first thing on her mind being, this is Black Angela writing about Black experiences. I think that's part of what we do with literature. That's part of what books are supposed to do, is to open up these new worlds. So that was ultimately the reason why I kind of straddled the two worlds.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I also get those who refuse to engage in those white spaces. I understand why they did it. I have sympathy for both points of view.
Even as a white person in those white spaces, those spaces are too white. They are, some of them just very, very, very white in a particular way of old-fashioned whiteness. And even as a white writer, you misunderstood.
The funniest incident, it didn't involve me, but it involved Zukiswa Wana, who wrote The Madams, which is a book about, Black madams, I think, mostly. And she went to a bookstore, I think, like somewhere in the northern suburbs. And the first question that she was asked by a member of the audience was, "Oh, were you a maid then?"
I wish I'd been a fly on that wall just to see her response.
Her response was fiery. Yeah, so there you have it.
Angela, as writers, we have to refill our creative well somehow. And for many of us, that is consuming narratives, consuming content. And Gail and I have already talked about what we've been watching this week, what we've been reading, what we've been listening to. And I've been wondering, how have you been refilling your well this week? What narratives have you been consuming that either worked or didn't work for you?
Okay, so from a television point of view, I've been watching You. As much as I said I try to avoid tropes that are similar to what I'm writing about, I'm addicted to that show. I don't know if you know
really?
It is about
it's
the serial
season
killer.
4 now, isn't it?
It's season 4,
yeah.
Which I found not as engaging, to be fair, as the other seasons. For some reason, it's very class focused and all of that, and of course the main character kind of shifts personality a little bit. But that's always interesting to me, because also it's an adaptation. So for obvious reasons, that's why it's also interesting to me. And then I'm reading. As I said, I try to avoid the genre that I'm writing at a particular time. So I'm reading a lot of nonfiction. I'm reading the most fascinating book. It's about Zola Mawabe. We grew up, we heard this name a lot when we were younger, as kids growing up in the township, because this guy was called the Black Robin Hood, because he was presented as stealing from the rich, to give to the poor. So when I saw that, Don Lepati and Nicholas Kerkinis have written a book about him, I had to grab it. And it's really, really fascinating because, during apartheid, you don't imagine a black guy managing to infiltrate his way into South African banking systems and finding a way to, I know we can't glorify fraud, but it's bloody interesting. So he would siphon money off of these banks. He managed to get a job for his girlfriend to work for one of the major banks. And it's an incredible, crazy, fascinating journey. So I'm reading this, and I'm also reading, and I think this is interesting, I'm reading a book called The Body for its inhabitants, like for us, its inhabitants. It's by a guy called Bill Bryanson. Why I'm enjoying this book is because it's so amazing as a writer, especially as a crime writer, the kind of detailed information you need to have or understanding of human physiology, because you're going to be describing, jugular veins, like somebody's going to throttle somebody, then what happens to, what is the body's reaction to that? So this book, is written in a very anecdotal fashion, but it's very scientific. So I actually recommend it for any writer because it explains every imaginable thing about the human body. And so it comes, and of course a lot of that, or some of that, will come in handy in your writing. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great, Angela. We want everyone to check out your books. I think they're all available in electronic format.
Yes, they
and
are.
Some of them are still in print and in the bookstores.
Indeed, they are.
So I would like everyone to look out for Critical But Stable and also for the new book, the sequel to Red Ink.
It's called The Read Dance Stalker.
Oh, it has
And
a
when
title.
can we expect it?
The Read Dance Stalker is coming to stalk you in your local neighborhood, probably sometime this year, later this year. Yeah.
Exciting.
Fantastic. I want everyone to look out for that and buy it. Thank you so much, Angela. This has been a blast, and have a good week.
You too.
Thank you, Angela.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. I loved every moment of it. Gail, I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did.
I loved it. I always forget how funny Angela is and how just being around her fills one with inspiration.
Absolutely. So what has inspired you in particular about that episode?
So for me, 100%, I'm going back to the office and Googling Save the Cat. I've never heard of it. It sounds amazing. And I'm needing something new in my approach to writing. Maybe I'll find it there. I'm very excited about that. And the other thing, I'm going to read The Body by Bill Bryson. I love Bill Bryson. His The Complete History of the World, or whatever it was called, changed a lot of my views about things. So I'm excited about The Body. So those for me are the big things that I wrote down while Angela was speaking. What about you?
Well, I think I need to learn to be a bit braver as a writer. You know, the way Angela was talking, it was clear that she is less timorous than I am, and possibly than you are. Maybe it's our white middle class thing, but she's not censoring herself at that moment of putting words on the page. She's putting them there and maybe rethinking it the next day or leaving it to the editor to sort out. And I think I just need to be a little bit braver, a little bit less scared of being cancelled. Obviously one does not want to be tone deaf or obnoxious, and that's not what I'm saying, but just perhaps break more boundaries and be a little bit braver on the page. Another thing I took from her was how to get over a writing slump. You know, she was talking about how she'd had a family emergency and that a family member's health was involved. And that's something you can't ignore. You can't just brush that off, and how it had led her into a writing slump. And I was very interested to hear that the thing that brought her out of that slump was launching into screenwriting, which is a very different discipline, and that had somehow reignited her creativity with regard to her normal novel writing as well, and that she was taking some of the techniques she learned in the screenwriting process and applying them to the novel writing process. So I'm hoping that, in fact, I think it will. This podcasting journey that we are on will inspire me and refill the well and give me new inspiration. But yeah, those are the things that I've taken from her.
And Fiona, what do you have to give to our audience? What is your piece of advice for aspirant writers this week?
I think if you are struggling, maybe try coming at it from a different point of view. Maybe start thinking like a screenwriter, think like a television writer, think like a poet if that's what works for you. Think like an advertising copywriter. Just change your perspective slightly and see if that helps you with the writing. What about you, Gail?
The first piece of advice I always give aspirant writers is keep your aims realistic. So don't try and write 2,000 words a day because you will fail. Try and write 200 words a day and then you'll succeed. So that for me, that's been one of the most important things that has kept me writing, that I have realistic goals and then I meet them and then I'm inspired to keep on writing. And that's what we want to do. Keep on writing.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you, the listeners. Check out our show notes for our social media. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Have you tried the Save the Cat method? Have you tried any of the other popular writing methods out there? How did they work for you? What do you do to get out of a slump? Contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everyone, and have a good week.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.